Welcome back to the Blues Notebook, the Carlisle United podcast where we try to make sense of life at Brunton Park so you don't have to. On today's episode, we're digging into a few big talking points as pre-season starts to get serious. We'll look at the 2-0 defeat to Salford. Despite the result, did we see flashes of what Rob Elliott wants for the team? We'll talk about the final friendly and what it might tell us about Elliott's first choice 11, who's playing their way in and who could be playing their way out. We'll also get into the new kits, their design, whether they actually feel like Carlisle, and round up everything else going on around the club, on and off the pitch. Before we start, John and I would like to give a huge thank you to everyone that listened and watched the first episode in our venture into the podcasting world and all the great feedback we've received. Just to touch on the feedback, John, you got a lot of good things said about it, didn't you?
Yeah, really grateful for what people have said so far. It is a new venture. We're dipping our toes into this at the very outset, and yeah, I mean, we launched the first one last Tuesday on the day of the Darlington friendly, and going over to there, got quite a lot of comments from supporters I bumped into and people that came up and said encouraging things about it. Really, they were sort of pleased with the idea, I think, and quite happy with the format. Obviously, it's very early days, and we'll be looking to develop and improve it. One or two people commented on the sort of little sound issues that weren't absolutely sort of crystal clear at times. So hopefully we'll have improved that for this one. And we're always open to suggestions as we go along. But yeah, just a brief and big thanks to everyone for welcoming us as they have, and for everyone that's given us a listen and a watch. You know, the YouTube numbers and Spotify numbers were very good for the first one, and onwards and upwards, hopefully.
Great. And just at the top of the show as well, if you do have any burning questions about Carlisle that you'd like to put to John and I, please just comment them down below and we'll get into them in later episodes. So, John, I think we should begin at Salford, the 2-0 loss, but the team did look good in spells. What's your take from the game?
Yeah, I think they did look good in spells. I mean, look, these friendlies they're not exact replicas of league games, are they, in many ways, because you usually get a clatter of substitutions, and we did get that in the second half. There's no sense of jeopardy on the game, and they're practice games, we all know that. So we have to measure our analysis probably in that context. I thought there was certainly some good from Carlisle in the first half, in just, I think, how they worked certain passages of play in Salford's half, how they sort of got around and behind them at times, and there were quite a lot of possibilities, I would say, with some quite creative movement, I thought, and I think the difference in the game was quite clearly the most important part of the game. You know, the finishing aspect, that ruthlessness. Carlisle's sort of sword was a bit blunt in that respect for all that they did fashion against a good League Two side. Let's not sort of get away from that. They just weren't as clinical as they're going to need to be when they're creating that sort of thing. And the difference was very stark with someone like Macaulay Langstaff, who Salford are by all accounts investing quite a considerable amount of money in on his wages. Ridiculous, really, that he's dropped to League Two in that sense. And both of his goals were pretty telling. The movement for that first goal when Salford just got through Carlisle down the middle too easily. That'll be something, I think, that would be probably the lesser aspect of the game for Carlisle, particularly that goal, I think, just in terms of how open they were to that counter attack. But Langstaff's movement still off the last defender, which I think was Malarkey, just to find that space and the finish. I think everyone in the ground could have shut their eyes and knew he was going to put that away. And I think his second goal was a bit of an object lesson, probably to young strikers, just in that moment of movement in the penalty area, just to create that space. First time finish, bang, 2-0. It was, in a way, it was a little bit how the game kind of unfolded. It was a little bit like what Carlisle were doing to weaker teams in the National League last season. At times, there were occasions when opposition were having quite a lot of the ball. And Carlisle were having to choosing to, I guess, in some ways, sit in and be patient and kind of let them have it a little bit. And then all of a sudden, Carlisle's sort of dynamism on the break with people like Adjiboy, etc., would just hit them, and all of a sudden there'd be one or two ahead. Now, it might not be an exact similarity to that, because Carlisle weren't just sitting with the ball and passing it around with no purpose. Certainly, I wouldn't say that at all. But Salford showed us the value of just having that sharpness and that ruthlessness. when you get the opportunity, even if you're not hogging the ball for long spells. So it was an interesting exercise. As I say, there was some encouragement in how Carlisle were playing. You could see some of the sort of principles Rob Elliott is trying to put into them as a sort of an attacking unit. Just those couple of frailties against the counter is something they'll obviously be aware of and have to focus on too.
Yeah, I was one of the 2,600 that was in Brunton Park. From my assessment of the game, it felt very different to what we've been seeing from Carlisle last season. They had control of the ball in large spells, although it was sometimes that didn't work, and obviously that's going to get drilled in by Rob Elliott more. But the patterns of play would starting to appear. You could get an idea of what Carlisle wanted to do when they had the ball. I think it's a case of if it maybe 2 weeks down the line, Georgie Kelly's sharper, he scores 2 of those 3 chances, and you've got a good draw against one of the favourites for League Two. There was certainly some bright sparks from my assessment. I think Miguel Aziz, although like we've spoke about earlier, he does probably need to run the game a bit more, be a bit more authoritative, but he did show flashes of brightness. I think I remember a first-time ball to Leo Duru at the back post was a highlight. I think that can be a weapon Carlisle can really use as well, because he was taking up that space in the right channel quite a lot. And I feel like if you overload that side with an Adjiboy or a Linney, the players of that quality, fullback's going to want to double up on the winger, and that gives Aziz time and space to find the perfect ball there. I also think Leo Duru was really good, and it was quite refreshing to see a right back who, no disrespect to Josh Williams at all, but Duru was up and down, and he did quite well defensively as well as offensively. And I feel like if Rob Elliott does want to drop into that 3 at the back, I think Duru will be a really good asset. I'm really happy Carlisle have made that trial permanent. And obviously he's young as well; he can grow.
Yeah, I think Duru, I and travelling supporters had the first look at him at Darlington last week, and he was very impressive, albeit against the team from a level down. Again, that's the context of that. But he was very attack minded, and when he did his sort of signing interview, what he said sort of just underlined, I think, what we saw in that. Yes, he may be ostensibly starting at right back, but he's clearly got a very attacking brief from Rob Elliott, and he seemed to fit into that very, very quickly and very sort of adeptly at Darlington. I thought on Tuesday initially it was more difficult for him to get forward, because I think Salford had an amount of control early on, and on the left hand side he had sort of his hands full with Odo, who's a tricky player, and also Carson, Hayden Carson, son of Scott Carson, a Cumbrian lad, sort of getting up from the left too. So it took Carlisle a little while, I think, to sort of absorb some of that and make whatever adjustments they did just to try and release Duru a bit. But when he did get forward, you see the outlet is clearly going to be. There were a couple of moments where he did sort of really threaten the back line, and I think, as we saw at Darlington, that there are 1 or 2 passages of play, 1 or 2 moments Carlisle are looking to build down that right-hand side. We saw it in the second half when Williams had come on and he sort of linked with Whelan in that space. We were seeing that sort of movement and that sort of pattern a heck of a lot at Darlington. Carlisle were getting in on that side at will. Obviously, they weren't going to do it quite as freely against a better side such as Salford, but that seems to be where Duru is going to be really penciled in to make his mark on the team. He's clearly got a pretty strong chance of starting the first game, I would say, by dint of the amount of football he's getting at the moment. We know Williams is fit now, and we know what qualities he has. But yeah, I think he's going to be a key man. Aziz, you mentioned too. He took up some interesting positions. He was pretty sort of fluent in his movement. He was getting forward quite a lot, in not just in right but in left channels too, just to open up certain pockets for the likes of Linney and Adjiboy, who seems to be looking at that left side more than the right at the moment too. So all these things offered a bit of creativity in the sort of idea, I think, of some of Carlisle's attacking. It comes down to them making the most of that, doesn't it? Yeah, Kelly didn't take the certain chances that came his way. I think Carlisle did create some good chances. They maybe all weren't entirely clear-cut chances, and so I think they just fell short of that, probably, I would say, in just cutting through enough. in the game itself. But
And
certainly in
just to
build up there was
stop you
something.
there,
Yeah.
John. Sorry. Just to also, when the chances were made and Salford cleared, I feel like when you've got a Harvey McAdam fit, the ball lands at the edge of the box. It came to Whelan a couple of times. I feel like McAdam hits that maybe half the time it goes in, because he's got a good track record of that as well.
Yeah, and we heard a lot of last season, and we saw it about McAdam's shooting power with not a great backlift and things that Mark Hughes used to talk about too. And I think when McAdam is fit, which it doesn't sound like he's going to be for the first game, but hopefully won't be too long afterwards. Yeah, I think he'll come back into it fairly quickly. And I think clearly the idea is that the bunker who's playing in defence at the moment will move up into that more defensive midfield area. Aziz is clearly going to be a more attack-minded central midfielder, and I think McAdam will get that license too to do that. It would be a waste not to, when he's shown that in those games against the likes of Forest Green and Boston and Sutton and those others last season that we saw. So yeah, I think the structure of the team clearly isn't at plan A point at the moment, just because of those injuries. And it'll be interesting how Elliott wants to build what will be his plan A, which sadly he can't really do at the moment.
And also, just while we mention his Miguel Aziz as well, during the game you could see he was calling for the ball a lot and dictating the play a lot while not having the ball at his feet. And I feel like Linney does that as well. And I feel like with players of that level, that stature, if they can put themselves onto the team and help the team, I think it's going to be nothing but good for the side as well. You can see it with Feeney in the back. You've got Aziz doing it in midfield now, and Linney up front. You've got leaders right through the team now, and I feel like that's something that Carlisle definitely need if they want to get promoted.
Yeah, and they're going to need that, I think, in terms of how they're looking to play as well, which is to have more of the ball, I think, generally than they did at times last season, and to try and dominate teams in their own halves a little bit more, and to be more intensive in that respect as well. They're going to need people who do demand the ball and who are very comfortable to receive it and to make those things happen, like Aziz looks to be sort of intent on that. So yeah, I would agree with that, and I think he looks like he handles the ball as well as anyone in that sort of Carlisle team. We hope he grows into that really authoritative figure in there and can really put his stamp on things.
On Tuesday, there was a notable lack of a very big striker. I don't know his height off the top of my head. Hudlin as well as I think Jack Young weren't in the squad. Do you have any insight about that? Obviously, the club look like they haven't made those trials permanent.
No, they've gone. That's been made clear. I mean, Rob Elliott after Darlington was initially suggesting they might be around for another week or so to give them due time for a decision. So I think when the Fleetwood game was cancelled, I think the assumption was, well, the next game might be their kind of audition. It turned out not to be the case. Carlisle have made the judgments before that on Hudlin and Young, and they weren't involved the other night, and they won't be involved again. I spoke to Rob Elliott after the game about this, and his kind of take was as simple as, look, in the end, there wasn't particularly going to be anything for them here based on what we saw. They're good lads. We don't want to sort of keep them dangling for anything. Glad they've come in and trained. We had a look at them, let them go and sort of make the path elsewhere. So pretty brief in terms of trials, both of those. We saw very little of them in action, other than a cameo apiece at Darlington. Obviously, Elliott and his staff have seen them a lot more in training, no doubt. But yeah, those get consigned into the sort of quiz questions of the future on obscure Carlisle trialists, I suppose. It'd be interesting where someone like Hudlin goes. 6'9", I think, is his official height. I think, if I've got that right. His career path's taken him to Vietnam recently. So where does someone like that go next? There'll be takers for someone with his just sheer size, I'm quite sure.
Yeah.
He's bobbed around the lower leagues with loans and things before, and National League too. So yeah, you wish those lads well. Clearly, Carlisle are going to need something a bit more, though, in terms of quality for whichever of those positions they're going to prioritise. And I know we'll come to that pretty soon too.
Yeah, we will come to that. But one notable name that wasn't in the squad on Tuesday was Gabe Breeze. Now, I actually spoke briefly with Breeze on the way out because he was sat up in the same stand as I was with the rest of the injured players. He said to me he got a gash in his knee, he couldn't play. And that, I think it's like what's been said to you, his focus is totally on Carlisle United. you spoke to Rob Elliott, and he said that no one's met Carlisle United's valuation of the goalkeeper. And as we've said, Breeze's focus is on the Blues. Archie Mayer did play well, I thought, on Tuesday, but Breeze has been there in the league. He's played a full season. I think like we've mentioned last week, it's 50-50 what the fan base think about him, but I think it's good to keep him if the money isn't there.
Oh, I think so. Yeah, I think so. But I sense this seems to be one that's going to run a little bit. The fact Carlisle are saying, look, until someone meets a valuation, then there's nothing further that will be done. That clearly suggests that there is a valuation that someone might meet down the line. Now, of course, pretty much every player in the world's got a valuation. There's very few players that aren't for sale on some level, and certainly at Carlisle's level that applies. I contrast comments, I guess, from Carlisle with what the Boreham Wood chairman came out and said earlier on in pre-season about their sort of star players. Danny Hunter, he said quite explicitly, look, we want to keep this together. We want to have a go. I'm of a sort of certain age now where, what do I gain from letting these lads go? I want to take an opportunity. You talk about Abdul Malik and Brunt and people like that. That was different in tone to what I guess has come out of Carlisle about Gabe Breeze. Now, look, if someone goes and pays the money for Abdul Malik, they're clearly going to have a limit they would accept. So whatever is said there, there's all a lot of smoke and mirrors in public comments, aren't there, in transfer markets and things. But that said, it hasn't been completely shut down. Yes, it's pretty clear, it's pretty apparent from what Rob Elliott said and from what one or two other sources are saying that any bid that has come in hasn't been sufficient, anywhere near sufficient for Carlisle to be doing business for. Will that happen? The fact that these stories keep coming out suggests there's forces at work, which there often are, again, with these sort of things, again, whether it's an agent or something else going on. Someone's trying to whip something up in the background. Carlisle seem quite relaxed about it generally in the tone that they're striking. So I guess we'll have to see whether anything materialises there. Gabe Breeze's character has never really been questioned, I don't think. Rob Elliott's spoken very highly of it. I asked him, with all this stuff going on, is his focus where it needs to be? Is his head being turned at all? And Rob Elliott said, I've got no qualms about his focus and his commitment to Carlisle as long as he's here. You don't really need to worry about that. And I think, knowing Gabe Breeze's character, I think that's fair. At the same time, there's EFL interest in him, so he'll be aware of that. And it'll be interesting to know what his sort of private take on that will be as to whether any of these bids grow or not. I think the other question at the moment is he going to start that first game too, having missed the game the other night with this gash. Rob Elliott said he'd had to have it stapled rather than stitched, so that suggests the injury was a bit deeper than perhaps it might have been. Will he play against Derby under-21s on Saturday? Will that be a risk? Or will it be a case of hopefully get him right for Worthing, and then there's the judgment call. Do you put him in? I think I suspect Breeze might still have that number one status, but it might be a bit closer now, partly because of the injury and partly because of maybe how Carlisle are looking to play and what Archie Mayer can bring to that. So that's an interesting question which might not be fully resolved yet. I'm sure it is in Rob Elliott's mind as to which way he's going to go, but it might be a closer call than we've had before, maybe with certain goalkeeping debates.
And just to add to the goalkeeping debate and the confusion around the market, finally Harrison Mayle does have a team. He's joined Tranmere. He's probably with all the Tranmere players, which look ecstatic to be there in their joining interviews. I think that noise from the outside of fans and other journalists saying we need to sign Harrison Mayle or Harrison Mayle wants to come. It was obvious he's asking for a lot of money. And when you look at the stats, I think off the top of my head, he only had 2 more clean sheets than Gabe Breeze last year. Obviously, very different player, and he's highly rated. But for the money that reportedly he was asking for, I think Carlisle made the right decision, if they ever were in for him, to not go for him.
Yeah, there's been certainly a debate going around about the sort of money he was asking for. I know he's been on social media denying some of the more excessive claims made about him and things. And I mean, we don't really know the exact truth of that, do we? I think the one thing to say about that is Carlisle aren't spending excessive money this summer, anything like it. I think in past summers and maybe past Januaries, had they really wanted Harrison Mail, there's a fair chance they would have gone and got him and paid kind of whatever it took. We've seen that in previous transfer windows. They're not doing that. This summer, the spending has been reduced. The approach to spending it has pretty dramatically changed. And Rob Elliott underlined that when I interviewed him at Darlington. He said, look, let's be clear. It's not the how much we're spending. It's the how, and it's what we're getting for it and what value we're getting for it. And Carlisle aren't throwing money around as boldly as before. Certainly, to any extent similar to what they've done in the past. And then we have to wait and see how far that sort of decision takes them now as a force in this league. They're looking to grow and develop that team in a slightly different way. And that value for money thing is what the accent is on. If they get it and it can grow with Rob Elliott's coaching, then that's the goal, isn't it? It comes back to that discussion we had last week about marquee signings, big signings, big name, big money signings, whatever you want, and whether those can still have their own value, which I think done right they can. Carlisle seem to be sort of steering back from that at the moment. So that's the Harrison Mail subject closed, isn't it, really, now? Which it's kind of been vaguely bobbing along for a while, but we have to talk about other people now that might or might not be linked with us.
And just to finally wrap up the Salford discussion, Adjiboy did get injured. I think everything's okay there. And there's obviously injured first teamers, which Rob Elliott would probably like to have at his disposal for pre-season, but the likes of Feeney, Harvey McAdam, and the two new boys from Gateshead just weren't fit enough for the game.
No, I had quite a lengthy interview with Elliott after the game and got into this. It was quite refreshing to speak to a manager that he was quite happy to be asked about injuries. He wasn't sort of shutting them down Mark Hughes style. With every respect to Mark Hughes, didn't have any problem with Mark, but it was a different tone of interview. And some updates on all of those were forthcoming. With Adjiboy, he sort of played down what would be an obvious worry when you see one of your key men going down on the back of several others being out. And he looked in quite a bit of pain when he went down, certainly the first time. I wasn't convinced he was going to carry on, but he did after treatment. And then another whack later sort of made the decision. I think that was that. Elliott said, look, he's had a couple of whacks. The back can sort of tighten and spasm up in certain scenarios. But he did say the doctors were quite content having assessed him, and he suggests he'll be all right. Whether he'll play him at Derby on Saturday is probably open to question. I mean, I asked him that. I think the implication was, look, if it's deemed any kind of risk, what's the point? Let's get him right for Worthing. So I wouldn't fall off my seat in shock if he's not in the team on Saturday. He might be, but again, they have other players that they might want to give time to. And in terms of those others, there was a little update on Nicholson and Richardson. Nicholson, Elliott suggested, a bit of a sort of a pelvic sort of issue, which had been lingering. But he said he expects him and Richardson to be ready to be in the squad for Worthing. Now, at this point, I think you'd have to say it would be surprising if either of them were in the 11, given the lack of time they've had, unless one of them can get, 70 or 90 minutes at Derby. Then you would imagine that players like that who are pretty lightly raced over the pre-season programme, match-wise, it's probably less likely they're going to be starting. But I suppose it's a relief to some degree that they're not going to be ruled out of action. He's going to be able to call upon them, and Carlisle aren't going to be too far away from being able to select these guys. It just means they're going to be going into game one. It looks like a little bit of a distance from what Elliott would consider perhaps his first choice selection. There's a bit of adapting going on, a little bit of make do and mending in certain positions, and whichever way you look at it, that's not ideal. And you just hope that what we're seeing at the moment, if this is looking like the broad plan to start the season, can be good enough and can click enough to get Carlisle off to a decent start. Because Feeney's going to be out for. The suggestion was 2 or 3 games into the season, we might then start to see him come back into it. Armstrong a little bit after in attack. McAdam shouldn't be too long into the season, but he's not going to make Worthing, Elliot was saying. And then you've got Mugabe, who's going to be out for a while longer, Embleton as well. So there's a lot of options he still can't turn to, but one or two that he can. The other night we saw Wern back on the pitch. We saw Hayden Atkinson coming back as well. So he's got a few more options at his disposal. It's just he's clearly not going to be at plan A point in a week or so's time.
And I'd just also like to say it was brilliant to see Jonah Lowe's and Will Rafferty get on the pitch as well. Really bright cameos from both of them, I think. And it's obviously great to see academy players get the opportunities.
Definitely, yeah. And those two did catch the eye in those little cameos. I mean, Jonah Lowe's, Elliot has talked about very highly this pre-season. He's used words like exceptional, and that makes you sit up and notice. And Jonah Lowe's, to me, looks like he's come back. Looks like he's come back a little physically. He's sort of moved on a little bit as well. There seems to be some development there. And just watching him and kind of body language on the pitch, he looks like a young player who looks like he wants to be in that environment. He wants to be in the men's environment now rather than something he feels like he might need a bit more of a gradual build up towards. And that's great to see. And that's why I think Elliot's considering him as a firmer part of things than he might with other young players. Now, whether he comes into the starting picture straight away, I suspect that's unlikely, but he looks like a player who's in a hurry to make his mark. And that's great to see from a young player who wants to grab that and who wants to seize that and he wants to be at home in this environment and feels it should be there. That's how it appears just watching him, which, let's just hope he continues to develop and gets opportunities to make his mark wherever they come. And young Rafferty, someone that's been around the first team training and made a couple of appearances this pre-season as well. He's, you don't get much better genes than the grandson of Billy Rafferty, do you, when you're an emerging footballer? And what a mentor he must have had in his young life already. And he looked bright, he looked confident, which is good to see. Again, you'd imagine someone like that, maybe a loan move down the line might be one of the obvious steps in his development. But good to see some emerging players like that around it. And they're certainly ones to watch. We don't want to overbuild them up and overhype them too early. I don't think that helps anyone, but certainly one or two names that you'll certainly have an eye on and hope that they can be among the ones that make that step and get across the bridge from academy football to senior football eventually in their own pathways and do it well.
Well, Carlisle now face Derby in their final pre-season friendly. What do you want to see from Carlisle as a journalist? And then also taking your journalist hat off, what do you want to see as a fan? Personally, I want to see a bit more development in the style of play. I think it looks like it will be effective when, obviously, it's going to take time. I think it's very night and day compared to what Mark Hughes had them playing. But I feel like once they get used to it and get embedded into it, I think it'll be good to watch for one, and I think it will get results. I think they'll be scoring a lot more goals. And as a fan, I'd just like to see some of the new signings, hopefully if they're fit, come in and just it's easy to say, but just goals.
Yeah, it's an interesting last friendly, I suppose, going to Derby under-21s at their training ground, because in terms of a something that's going to be close to your league games, I don't think this would be the one really necessarily, would it? So I'm interested in how Rob Elliott uses this game in particular. I think it'll be, fundamentally, as most friendlies are, it's still going to be about fitness. It's still going to be about readiness and sharpness. It'll be interesting what 11 he names and how many minutes he gives them. I think he'll want to get quite a number up to pretty high levels of numbers again. There might be one or two getting 90 minutes perhaps again. Perhaps one or two others that need starts. Perhaps, the likes of Josh Williams, who's just sort of feeling his way back into it. People like Hayden Atkinson, who's only just coming back in there as well. So it might be a bit of a mixture, just in the sense that, it's not going to resemble the sort of test they're going to get necessarily when the league season starts. Now, I've got no doubt that Derby under-21s will be a technically good sort of higher end academy side. I'm sure there'll be a fair bit of possession. And we know that Worthing on the opening day are going to be a possession team. That's what Adam Hinchelwood's teams are known for. So
Yeah.
that might be a very broad and pretty crude similarity. I'm sure there'll be a lot of differences too. And yeah, if Carlisle are going to put the full guns out, you'd expect them to win the game. You'd expect them to get some goals. And you'd expect us to see a little bit more of what Elliott's trying to drill in terms of those patterns and passages and things that you mentioned before. So, yeah, I think if you were a fan, you'd probably, if you had a checklist, you would want to see probably Georgie Kelly getting a goal because he's been close in the last couple, not quite done it. I know he got a few against Queen of the South in the mystery scoreline friendly earlier on in the summer, but like to see him on the end of something getting a goal and things like that. People like Malarkey, who we've not touched on yet, Toby Malarkey, who played the other night. You'd hope it's a game where he can get embedded into the team again for another game, because there's obviously a strong chance he's going to be involved in starting that Worthing game, you would think. And whatever else Elliott might be looking at, do we see Cameron Harper in midfield again, as we did, the other night and at Darlington, with pretty reasonable results, I would say. Actually, the other night, I don't know what you thought of that. It's an ongoing experiment. It looks like. I thought in the first half, Carlisle in general and Harper perhaps just weren't as dynamic in that midfield area. But I think as it went on, I thought he pressed very well. He helped Carlisle win the ball back pretty well. He was quite aggressive in that press. And I don't think we should close our minds to the idea of it, even if it's clearly not going to be something they're going to be relying on for long stretches, I don't think.
I definitely think it's an asset more than a detriment. My take was the first goal, Carlisle kind of got overrun in midfield very easily. I think that changes with Harvey Bunker pushed forward, which I'd like to see him play that role against Derby, but again, with the lack of centre backs, I don't know if he will. But I feel like Harper, the more midfield options you have, the better, because then you can change the midfield depending on the game state. If you need to attack more, if you need to press more, he's obviously got energy. He does have quality. I don't think why it couldn't work. I think it'll take some time to get him fully embedded into that kind of similar situation with Jack Ellis when he got pushed in there last season. But it's not unheard of for fullbacks going into midfield, is it?
No, not at all. And you mentioned Ellis, yeah, and I think I think people get pictures in their minds of where they expect a player to be, and I think sometimes that can take a bit of shifting in terms of perception. In reality, I think Jack Ellis did pretty well most of the time when he did drop into midfield last season. I don't think it was a bad move at all. At times, he was one of Carlisle's better players in the area. Maybe not all the time, but certainly some of the time. So I think there seems to be an accent on adaptability in what Rob Elliott's trying to preach. I think he's moving certain players around in other areas, such as Ajiboy coming in off the left. Now, I think that's a legitimate question on that one. Is that the right thing to do because of how well he was performing on the right last season?
Yeah,
he had quite a good. He seemed to have a good understanding with Luke Armstrong in terms of those movements in the last third as well. But that said, again, we shouldn't dismiss these ideas before we've had the chance to see them flourish. And we saw Ajiboy causing a bit of danger the other night on the left before he got injured too. So let's consider these things, and let's not kind of pigeonhole things, I suppose. There's going to be a bit of variety, I think, in how Carlisle play under Elliott, it looks like, and having certain players that can slot into different parts, like Bunker in midfield and defence, perhaps like Harper doing an auxiliary role in midfield now and again, maybe Ajiboy left or right, Linney left or the 10, things like that. Well, I think you always have to walk the line between knowing what your strengths are as a unit and accentuating those, and trying different things, mixing things up, having some variety. I think at some point you have to find what is going to be the way forward for you. But a bit of adaptability certainly won't hurt them, I don't think.
And amidst all the noise of friendlies, Carlisle have debuted both their home and away strip for this coming season. Personally, I think that's some of the best we've had for a while. The home kit, finally blue, get rid of the reds. Last season looked a bit like an Aquafresh toothpaste, to be honest. And the away kit, I I just love how Carlisle keep coming up with these wacky designs. I feel like the fans really have come around to it as well. What are your thoughts on the kits, John?
Yeah, home kit. I think when I first saw it, when it was revealed a couple of Wednesdays ago, my first reaction was a little sort of internal sigh of relief, I think. And I suspect probably a few other fans maybe felt the same. Maybe not all. You can't speak for every fan, but I felt, it probably was time we went back to that sort of general look, the solid blue, not as many frills. And I think that's what a number of fans have been calling for. I think the feedback the club had got and they've talked about was with that in mind. So I think it's right that it went back to that. I think it looks pretty good. I generally don't get too sort of aerated about kits as a rule, and I think after a while you kind of stop seeing them eventually, don't you? But certainly initially. It looks good. It looks solid. I think that the sort of pattern the embossed sort of patterning looks pretty good. Some people like the sort of white piping down the shoulder arm area. Some people don't, but I think that's a small point of debate, to be honest, in the look of a kit. The other question is about blue shorts instead of white shorts.
I was going to mention it. Yeah, I think the one downside to it needs white shorts.
Well, that's again that's a debate, isn't it? And I think I spoke to Steph, who runs the Blues store, at the launch, and she said that is a piece of feedback they have had from some, and that's something they will look at and contemplate, I think, as they move forward. I don't know. I don't have a really strong view either way on that one. I think traditionally the white shorts is probably the look you would maybe think about more when you're thinking about a Carlisle team. So perhaps they go down that route again, maybe eventually. But yeah, I give it a thumbs up, that new home kit, certainly. And away kit, it's very much Carlisle's identity now, isn't it? To do something creative, a bit offbeat, a bit off the wall, a bit colourful, a bit wacky at times. And so we're going to see a lot of pink around away grounds and home grounds, aren't we, this season too? So they've done it again. I'm sure it'll sell bucket loads. My preference is the home kit over the two. Everyone has their own preferences, don't they? So I think it might be a bit more Marmite, that one, than the home kit, but I think away kits, especially when you're going a bit more outside the box, tend to be that, don't they? I think if it catches the eye, it gets a bit of notoriety, like the fruit salad did a few years ago, then they'll certainly be onto a winner.
Hopefully less notoriety than losing every match in the fruit salad kit, but that's a different point. Before we move on, we'd like to put a question out to the audience. Can you give us your top 3 Carlisle United home kits and away kits? They can be together, separate lists, just for a bit of fun. I'd like to see what the fans think as well. Does this pairing of kits make it into the top 3? I think they'd probably have to get promoted for that to happen. I think when you win something, the kit kind of becomes synonymous with that. But yeah, let us know what you think. So we had a question from Dan, one of our podcast listeners, and he asks, which areas of the pitch do you think the Blues still need to strengthen before the season starts? I think that's a question that a lot of fans are thinking, really. We mentioned the lack of goals in the Salford game, despite the chances, and also Hudlin now no longer in the picture for a full contract with Carlisle. I'd like to start off by saying I think we need a striker. I know we've got Luke Armstrong and Kelly, and Linney can play there as well, but I'd expect to see him on the left or as in the 10, like we've mentioned. I think we need something different up top. Kelly and Armstrong, although not the same, are very similar play styles. I'd love to see a pacey striker you could bring on for the last half an hour, balls in behind, and test and really stretch the National League defences.
Yeah, I think I would agree with that. And I think attack is the area I think you would naturally look at. Thanks, Dan, for the question, and it's a pretty prevalent one, I think. And I think another attacking, another striker, centre forward option, I think would be top of a lot of people's lists at the moment. And when we interviewed Rob Elliott a couple of weeks ago, and he was talking about injuries, he said, look, centre back and attack are areas we might have to do something. He's since done something at centre back with Malarkey. He's in for half a season. I think that they might look at something longer there if that works out. An attack. Well, I asked Elliot again the other night about this. In light of Hudlin moving on and in light of Armstrong still being a few weeks away, is that something you feel you need to look at? His answer was, essentially that we're not going to be hasty. That will, it's all about getting the right people in rather than just getting another body in. And that's fair. That's how Carlisle are approaching things generally, it seems, in the market. It does look light to me, certainly, as you've suggested, with what they have at the moment. They're one mishap away from being extremely light, I think, as in that number 9 area, certainly. We know Georgie Kelly's injury problems are certainly much less than they used to be, and we touch wood very firmly when we say that. But look, no player is impervious to injury, and I feel that Carlisle are something light there. There's young players like Seb Mason waiting in the wings, but I don't imagine he's ready to be thrown in as a frontline option right now. I don't think that'd be the case. So yeah, I'd like to see them do something else. Maybe, like you said, a bit of additional pace up there. They have to look at that market carefully if it's going to be the younger market or the loan market, because we saw some loans come in last season that didn't particularly offer a game changing addition. Hugh Parker seemed an honest young player who might grow into a threat at this sort of level, but he wasn't quite ready to do that. And we saw Yeboah out wide, who was, other than cameos, didn't really bring a huge amount when it come to that. So that market is one you have to go through with a fine tooth comb, I think. But you would also expect Carlisle recruitment wise to be pretty poised and have something within reach at this point. Certainly having known about Armstrong's injury for a period of weeks as they've had as well, and they might yet do something. They didn't sound like there was a rush or an urgency to do something from how Rob Elliott spoke the other night, but it seems pretty obvious that there's a lightness in number in that area right now. Whether they'll do something before Worthing, I don't honestly know that. You'd like to think they'll be looking and they'll be trying, though, I would think, because that just seems something they could do with, to be honest.
Yeah, and sticking with that question as well, if we were to throw out a wild card position that maybe Carlisle need to strengthen, that isn't striker or centre back, I'd like to see. We've got a lot of midfielders, but I'd like to see just maybe one more defensive midfielder to come in. I feel like you don't want to anchor all your hopes on Harvey Bunker being the anchor in that midfield, especially when you don't want to lose McCallum's attacking prowess, because obviously last season he scored a lot of goals and he was very influential. Boston United away comes straight to mind. So I'd like to see maybe an older head getting signed in that defensive midfield position as well. Just happy with playing a bit part. But if Bunker needs a rest, you don't want to play him into the ground. He can come in and do that job as well.
Yeah, I think that's a reasonable shout. The fact that Carlisle are currently sort of deploying Cameron Harper in there, and that, again, we've discussed that. We're not dismissing that idea, but by any means. But that does suggest that they're perhaps an option like there at the moment with the injuries. And yeah, it's a long season, isn't it? It's a long season, and at times it's a slog of a season. And Carlisle were fortunate in a lot of ways that someone like Alex Gilead last season was so durable for as long as he was. He started most games. He was barely substituted, and until he had that serious knee injury, unfortunately, at Easter, he was pretty good for selection and to cover miles. For the large majority of things. Now, again, there was a debate about whether Carlisle had enough in midfield last season. That's a different debate, but they had some experience in there. They had a bit of know-how in there in someone like Gilead, and yeah, I think a bit of experience wouldn't be amiss. York certainly brought that in with the likes of Boateng and Banks last summer, didn't they? Carlisle don't look to be in the market for players that are going to be necessarily maybe as costly as that. So do you then get that type of player with the kind of restricted budget that they're operating with? I think that's another question. The fact that they looked at Jack Young maybe suggests that they're open to something in midfield. I don't know how seriously they were really considering him in the fullness of it, but maybe that's another area. There's another debate about, do they need to look at something in that sort of number 10 area? Wern is back now, of course, but Con Clark was the chosen one for a lot of last season. It didn't quite work out in the end. Do they need that spark from someone else in there, perhaps? even though they're going to be setting up in a different way, and someone like Aziz is going to be a more attacking influence, hopefully from midfield, and Linney's dropping into the 10, and Wern may flit around as he does as well. So it'll be interesting exactly how Elliott sees that role in the bigger picture. But I still think we come back to striker, centre forward being the glaringly obvious one. If you were to add one more player now, where would it be? I think it would be there.
Yeah. So something we didn't touch on last week, but is obviously it's a big move. Carlisle have finally announced that they have a new CEO, Tom Lawrence. He joined from Southend. You've covered this a bit on our online coverage and in the papers, John. But just outline what you think Tom Lawrence can add to the club, and also what he should be prioritising in his first few months.
Well, he's spoken pretty highly of by people at Southend, people who know Southend, and certainly supporters there as well. So I think that's a good start when you're trying to get a perception of a new man. Now he comes into different circumstances here than he came into at Southend. It wasn't far off a crisis point when he came in down there under the latter stages of the Ron Martin time, and that really become very perilous in the end. I mean, I spoke to Chris Phillips, who covers Southend for the Echo, and one of our NewsQuest colleagues. Chris is a fantastic correspondent down there. There was an audio piece we did on our website for subscribers where Chris spoke at length about Tom Lawrence, and he said, look, without Tom Lawrence, there's a fair prospect Southend United wouldn't exist. So when it came to the crunch there, he was clearly a pivotal figure. He comes from a legal background as well, and I'm sure that got brought to bear numerous times as Southend's future was on the line. He sort of straddled the end of that time and the slightly more settled waters of a new regime, I suppose, there. Although I don't know if it's entirely settled and smooth down there. It's certainly not the club in danger point that they were before. Carlisle is in a different place, clearly, under their owners, with the amount of investment and money they've put into the place and what their sort of ambitions are, I guess, for the club. Tom Piatek said when they were making the change with Nigel Clibbens that they wanted someone who's sort of ready and fit to oversee a new period of growth at the club, and to kind of put his stamp on it for something that might be a 10-year period or something like that. I'm interested in what his particular remit is going to be within those generalities, if you like. Carlisle are still a National League club. We hope that's going to be for a limited time. If it isn't, how does Tom Lawrence sort of manage the ramifications of that when it comes to how Carlisle look to grow off the pitch, how much they're able to, things like the academy, which hasn't really been touched upon greatly in any sort of public way yet by the club, I think, in terms of how that funding is reduced in your second year as a National League club, and then there are further sort of implications if you're in it for longer. The sheep mount situation is another one that's clearly going to be on his agenda, that training ground thing. Now, I'm sure Tom Lawrence will be across all of this, but the sheep mount is one where the language surrounding it has become more conditional, I would say, than it was at the outset. And we await the sort of definitive outcome on that. I think the very most recent update did stress that the club are still happy with the site and they're happy to go forward at the site. But, it wasn't long ago that Tom Piatek was saying that experts, consultants, etc., were really analysing that closely to judge if it still is the right place. So we're clearly not at the point yet where everything is, all the pieces are there, the long-term lease and things like that, that's still unresolved. So that's something that he will have to get deep into, you would think. If it doesn't end up happening there, what is the plan from that point? This is about owner vision as well as sort of chief executive execution, if you like. But these are some of the areas you think will be on his desk. And I think I'm also interested in how public facing someone like Tom Lawrence will be as well. To what extent is he going to be a very front facing, outward facing chief executive? Nigel Clibbens, his predecessor, certainly ramped things up in terms of fan engagement, certainly in terms of the information that was getting distributed to fans in terms of official updates and supporters group meetings and things like that. You perhaps didn't necessarily hear as much from Nigel Clibbens in terms of regular interviews and availability for that sort of thing. So is Tom Lawrence going to be a different kettle of fish when it comes to that? Chris Phillips at the Echo in Southend sort of said he's not one that courts publicity as such, so you're not going to necessarily get that from him, but he's pretty engaging and he's someone that's pretty happy and sees the importance in having that dialogue with people and supporters. And you very much want that from a chief executive, especially at a time when the owners are much less inclined to be giving interviews. It's a long time since we and other media organisations sat down with Tom Piatek. That's certainly gone vastly the other way from how it was at the outset. So if that is creating a void of voices from the very top, which I think it is, then you would imagine Tom Lawrence would have some brief or inclination to fill that. So I would hope that'll be the case, and I hope he keeps pushing the button on fan engagement in the right sort of ways, and there's no rowing back from that. Because I think that is one thing that I think, whatever people might debate about Nigel Clibben's legacy, I think that will be in the positive column of it. That more fans were entrusted with more information generally, I think, than they were before, and I hope that remains. We'll wait to see, because we're not being told yet that he's fully fledged and in the role entirely yet, because of the regulator sort of vetting process that seems to go on for quite a while. So I'm not sure exactly where that's at the moment. I know he's been around the club and sort of getting used to the place, I suppose, but it'd be nice to know when that comes to a head and he can really start in the full and proper way. You'd hope that would be before the start of the season, wouldn't it, for a new CEO to be in place? And then hopefully we'll hear from him soon. I think that would be important. Let's get some good first impressions, hopefully, too, and see how he comes across, because that matters to people, I think.
Especially what you just mentioned with Clibbens. I think you don't want to backtrack into an information black hole, because that's when speculation starts growing. I think that's something that, to be honest, it kind of happened through summer with Mark Hughes' future up in the air. Obviously, we didn't have a CEO. Martin Foyle, was he staying? Was he going? And I feel like just the engagement from the club, even to us, to then pass it on to the fans, just some information to just let the fans know what's going on. Was Mark Hughes in contract talks? Was he not? Were they looking for a new manager? Were they not? Was the CEO search going positively, or was it not going to be imminent? I feel like keeping that openness to fans is something that the club definitely need to keep. I think you see it all up and down the leagues with owners and clubs that don't engage with their fans. It very quickly turns sour, and we're not saying that's going to happen at Carlisle United. It's the owners are, from my point of view, are liked quite a lot, and they've done a lot for the club, but just keeping that openness and that engagement with the fans, I think, is paramount.
Yeah, absolutely. Amen to that, I think. And I think supporters need to believe in the people who are running the club too, and they need to see them. Football isn't like every other industry going, is it? We know that. And as Carlisle fans of a certain age will remember, there is, you can very much have it the other way, where your chairman and CEO is very publicity hungry, and that brings its own problems potentially. We've seen that with Mike in the Michael Knighton era, most notoriously. And there's certainly merit in being the sort of sober, quiet, businesslike people, I guess, too. But I think people need to identify with who's running the show to some degree. I think we could hear more from the owners, quite frankly. I say that with every respect. I think there's a balance to be struck. I think it's perhaps gone from one extreme to the other, perhaps in terms of what they're saying. I think, at a time when Carlisle have gone through certain changes in terms of certainly the football spending approach. I know Mark Tierney has sort of articulated some of that, certainly last season. I think we're pretty clear where they're going. I still think it would be good to hear from the owner and owners just about, what strategy might underpin that in a shorter and longer term.
Yeah.
I think people would probably like to hear from Tom Piatek and the family at some stage, maybe not necessarily every week or every month, and maybe not to the volume that it was initially. I don't think you should necessarily want or expect that, but I still think it would be good to hear something sort of upfront and open on areas like that at some point in the near future, I would say.
And then the final topic we'll touch on briefly, it's not so Carlisle United centric, but it looks like James Trafford will move to Leeds. I think it's about 40 million. I think it was reported by Sky Sports. It's brilliant to see a Cumbrian. Obviously he was at Man City, didn't quite work out from there, especially with Donnarumma coming in. But seeing a Cumbrian starting alongside Dean Henderson in the Premier League is pretty special.
Of course it is, yeah, of course it is. And, every chance we're talking about a future England number one in James Trafford. I think a lot of people expect that of him. I've been fortunate to know James from a very young age. I remember going to interview him at the farm in Graysoon when he was 11 or 12 and just about to go to Man City. Fantastic family, his parents and the environment, and he's always been a pretty down-to-earth lad, content just to come back to Cumbria and just sort of slip in quietly back into the old sort of family life and community around here. And but he's clearly got a heck of a lot of talent, and I guess I like the fact that it seems he's now ready to push on and be a first team starter in the Premier League somewhere else and make his path, like Henderson, I guess, has done at Crystal Palace too, because he could have waited it out, I suppose, at Manchester United had he been that way inclined, and maybe it would have unfolded that way for him. Maybe it wouldn't. He's gone and done great things at Palace and really carving out an identity there. I hope Trafford does that if it does turn out to be Leeds, which it's looking at. And yeah, it's a fantastic story for Cumbrian football, and it's a great one for Carlisle United's academy that they've had a part at the outset of these lads, and great to see the county's flag being flown so well by these guys who were obviously at the World Cup as well. And at what point does England's goalkeeping conversation change? From Jordan Pickford and these two would seem to be the next in line. So it'd be interesting to see if they were fighting over that number one slot for a period of time as well. So great success stories that we can certainly, from a Carlisle United point of view, that the club can certainly shout about as much as they can, as regards pathways and what's possible. And it's great for the county. We should take a lot of pride in it, and we shouldn't underplay it, because these are elite, real elite Premier League footballers, and to get that far from humble beginnings, if you want to call it that, wherever in the country you're from, takes, well, very, very few do it, don't they? And we've got more than one doing it. So wish James well, and I hope we're watching another stage in a top flourishing career.
And just before we wrap up, we'd like to remind our viewers about our News and Star subscription offers ahead of the new season, John.
Yeah, it's the big offer is still there. £6 for 6 months, or half price for a full year. It gets you access to everything we do, all the in-depth coverage, the audio, the nostalgia, the features, the marks out of 10, which will be coming when the season starts again, so people can disagree with those as vehemently as they want, and everything else that builds up the package of our coverage. If you go onto the Carlisle United section of the website, there's a link there. It's on my social media, on X, it's pinned there. It's on our Facebook page too. So please grab that while you can if you want to get the comprehensive stuff. The offer is open for a few more weeks, into the start of the season. So we've had a lot of people signing up over the last few weeks too. So grab it while it's there, while it's hot. There's a competition to win a new home shirt too that's live at the minute. It's an XL blue home shirt. So get in amongst that as well if you fancy that too. So lots of benefits. We're not going to ramble on about these plugs too much, but it would be wrong not to highlight them, because a lot of people are hopefully finding the benefit of them.
Well, thanks for joining us again. As always, we want to hear from you. What are your thoughts on the Salford game and the upcoming Derby game as well? We'd also, like we've mentioned, like to know your top 3 Carlisle United hits. If you're listening on Spotify and other podcast apps are soon to come, please hit follow. If you're watching on YouTube, like, subscribe, drop a comment. Do you have a question that you desperately want to ask John and I? Thanks for listening, and we'll be back soon with another entry in the Blues Notebook.